that point, I just sort of sat up in bed holding my newborn baby and said, what? Who is this woman? And why was she on the ship? And why did he maroon her? How did she annoy him? And how did she survive? The best piece of writing advice I've ever been given is probably from my dad. I think that I would like readers to feel that they've been on a journey in this book, that they have traveled with Marguerite to a place that is really like going to the moon.
Hello, and welcome to Elena Meets the Author. I am your host, Elena Bose. This podcast explores how authors create a world that we can escape into. Join me as we demystify the magic that authors use to keep us turning the page. Today, I'm speaking to American author Allegra Goodman about her immersive and haunting novel, Isola, which is based on a true story of a young woman who sailed from France to the New World in 1542 and was marooned on an island in the Gulf of St. Lawrence. Isola has been praised by the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Atlantic, and it's a Reese's Book Club pick. The story centers on a French noblewoman named Marguerite de la Rocque de Roberval, who was born to great wealth in Périgord in 16th century France. By the age of 3, Marguerite is orphaned and becomes the responsibility of her cousin and guardian, Jean-François de la Rocque de Roberval, who has got to be the world's worst guardian. Roberval sells Marguerite's estate to pay off his gambling debts, and then in 1542, when Marguerite is about 18 years old, he takes her on a dangerous sailing voyage to what was then called New France, now Canada. On the ship, Marguerite falls in love with Roberval's accountant, which infuriates Roberval. So he maroons the two of them, plus Marguerite's loyal nanny, Damien, on a barren island in the Gulf of St. Lawrence. Think icy winters and hungry polar bears. Allegra's description of life in courtly France and then later its opposite, a freezing island in the middle of nowhere, are fabulous. At first, when the couple are marooned, it's summer and the island isn't so inhospitable. Allegra writes this lovely passage, which I will read quickly. Our isle was both beautiful and strange. In morning light, the waves were liquid silver. Mist clung to us so that we walked in a white cloud. Offshore, seabirds circled and dove into the sea for fish. With perfect faith, the birds plummeted head first, dropping from such height, so hard and fast that water flew up around them. Again and again, the seabirds plunged, and we stood upon the rocks, entranced to watch them fall. All around our knees, the wild grass rustled and hissed sibilantly. Everywhere we stepped, we heard that sound. Marguerite soon learns that there's not much on this island, apart from one type of sour berry, birds, foxes, wolves, and polar bears. I am terrified of all bears, so I found those scenes where Marguerite must fight off the polar bears really scary. I peeked ahead at the chapter's title, so I knew she was going to survive, but it was harrowing. This is a story of courage, resilience, a coming-of-age tale, where the once pampered Marguerite learns how to not just survive, but really live. I learned about Renaissance France, the Arctic wilderness, and what life was like for a woman in the 16th century. Not easy, let me tell you. Allegra, hello and welcome.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. I'm so glad you could make the show. First question, obvious one, is can you tell us about how you came across the real story that inspired this incredible work of historical fiction?
So this was many years ago. Over 20 years ago, my family took a road trip up from Cambridge, Massachusetts, up to Montreal. We drove up through Vermont. And we had 4 children. We have 4 children. At the time, they were 10 years old, 7, 3, and 0. We had a newborn with us. So we had the 3 boys, were the older ones, and this little baby girl. And I'm still not sure why I consented to go on this vacation, so-called vacation, with a newborn baby. But I went. I think it was some sort of postpartum euphoria. But we all went, and we did have a very good time. But before we went, I went to the Cambridge Public Library and took out every children's book I could find about Canadian history because we were going up to Canada, which I, again, in my euphoric state, thought I was going to read with my sons. And surprise, surprise, as we went on this vacation, they had no interest in these books and didn't read any of them. But I read all of them because I was up all night nursing the baby. And they were about 15. They were all quite short because they were for, young children or maybe middle grade children. And I came across this book about the voyages of Jacques Cartier to France. He did 3 voyages, to New France from France. He did 3 voyages. And it was in the 16th century. So this is before Champlain. This is before the Pilgrims came to Plymouth. Really, nobody had been there from Europe. They didn't know how big Canada was going to be. He had only really sort of saw the coastline of Canada, and he saw the Gulf of St. Lawrence, which he named, and the mighty St. Lawrence River. And at that time, he sort of thought or hoped that, you might follow this river along and get to China. They were still sort of in those stages of exploration. So very little known. And as I was reading this book about Cartier and his 3 voyages, I read an aside that the writer put in parentheses that on the 3rd voyage, a ship of colonists came out to New France. And on the ship, which was commanded by a man named Roberval, who was named viceroy of all of this vast uncharted territory, was a young kinswoman of his who annoyed him. So he set her on an island and marooned her in the Gulf of St. Lawrence. And, at that point, I just sort of sat up in bed holding my newborn baby and said, what? Who is this woman? And why was she on the ship? And why did he, maroon her? How did she annoy him? And how did she survive? And I thought at the time, this is such an interesting story. It would be a great story for a novel. But then I thought quickly, I'm not a historical novelist. And so I sort of shelved that idea for many years and wrote many other books. And then eventually came back to this idea and found it so compelling, I couldn't stop myself. I could no longer not write this book.
Exactly. Wow. I listened to an interview where you talked about your process and how finding the voice of the novel and protagonist is your key into the story. Can you tell us about that vis-a-vis Isola? And then please, can you read the first page of your book?
Of course. So when I sort of started to realize that this idea was haunting me after years, I actually did a bunch of reading about Marguerite, what's known about her and her world. And I did a lot of thinking, but I thought if I could just hear her telling the story, I really envisioned from the beginning that this would be like a female Robinson Crusoe story. And Crusoe tells his story in the first person. So I thought, well, if this is going to be in the classic tradition of castaway tales, she's got to tell her story in the first person. So then the question was, how would she tell it? What does her voice sound like? And I really believed that if I could get her voice right, I would have the key to everything that followed. And voice is very important to me in all of my books. So I ended up, because I was intimidated to write this and afraid to type it on my computer and face the blank screen, I took a notebook and I started by hand writing out trial first lines of the book. And by that time, I knew quite a bit about her. So my first lines were sort of too information heavy at the beginning. And over time, they got simpler as I went. But I was really thinking about what words would she use? How would she sound to us? She wouldn't talk the way I talk as a 21st century American person, right? She was, from the 16th century. That said, I didn't feel like I had to make her sound Shakespearean or something like that because she would have been speaking and thinking and dreaming in French. So whatever she said was going to be translated anyway. So I figured, let's just do a clean translation from her in French.
Yeah.
So I was sort of liberated by those idioms and cliches that we have in our mind of how people talk in the 16th century. English. So I just kept trying over and over, trial and error, writing the first line. And I filled several pages of this notebook with handwritten first lines. And I did maybe 30 tries. And when I got to the 30th, I came up with a very simple opening sentence. And I sort of looked at it and thought, oh, there she is. I can hear her speaking to me. And once I had that sentence, I felt like the rest of the story would unfold. And, not to make light because it was a lot of work, but I did feel like she was telling me the story, So I will read to you So this is the first sentence that I wrote, and it's unchanged in the book when I finally got it right in the notebook. I never knew my mother. She died the night that I was born, and so we passed each other in the dark. And then I continued. She left me her name, Marguerite, and her ruby ring, but no memory of her. I did not know my father either. When I was 3 years old, he was killed fighting for the king at Pavia. Then I was rich, although I did not know it, and poor, although I did not know it. I was heir to a chateau in Perigord with its own villages, vineyards, and sunny fields. But I had no parents, aunts, or uncles living. Servants surrounded me, but I had no sisters or brothers, and so I was alone. My nurse Damian was my first teacher. She was an old woman, at least 40, and her hair, once red, was faded like brick. Her eyes were shrewd but tired, and all around her mouth, her skin was creased in little lines like unpressed linen. My nurse was stout, her stomach soft, her bosom pillowy. When we lay down to sleep, she held me close as though I were her own. And if I was not her child, then certainly she belonged to me, for she had served my family since she was a girl. She said my father had been noble, not just in name, but on the battlefield. When his horse was killed under him, he fought on with sword and pike until an archer shot him in the neck. Wounded, my father fell, but his men broke off the arrow shaft and bore him away. In his tent, even as a surgeon cut out the arrowhead, my father demanded to return to fight. Take me back, he gasped, while his blood streamed out in rivulets. I imagined his blood ruby red. As for my mother, she had been a beauty. My eyes were green, but her eyes had been greener. My hair was amber brown, but hers had been gold like winter wheat. My mother's hands were elegant, her fingers long. When she played the lute, her notes were perfect, but her modesty was such that she performed only for her own ladies. As a girl, my mother had been gentle and obedient, but my nurse would do her best with me. Damian fussed, but she was kind. When I tested her, she forgave me. Only on great occasions did she lose patience. The first time my guardian visited, Damian's sharp words startled me. After a messenger summoned me downstairs, my nurse scolded, "You aren't fit to be seen. Your slippers are disgraceful." "How are they disgraceful?" I asked as she helped me into silver sleeves. My nurse set me down hard, and I slumped, offended. "But she did not relent. Sit straight. Do not let your back so much as touch your chair." "Why not?" "What will happen if I touch my chair?" "No questions." "Why?" "Oh, for God's sake." My nurse could not read, but she had taught me how to pray. Our Father, our Mother, Holy Mary, full of grace. At first I imagined my own parents as I intoned these words, but Damian stamped out this childish heresy. You did not pray to your own father and mother, but to the father and mother of the world, the king and queen who reigned in heaven. And so I understood that while I belonged to the Lord and to the Virgin, they did not belong to me. This was true of my inheritance as well. Because I could not govern my own lands, I had a guardian, and he would manage my estate until my marriage. I was already betrothed and would wed at 15 if I lived.
Thank you. In that very first paragraph, we learn that Marguerite's life began with an ordeal that left her alone. Two themes that continue throughout the book: survival and solitude. Later, when Marguerite meets the queen acknowledges that she too has suffered. Quote, "I have been alone, bereft, but I know now that in solitude we find our way."
I was really interested in those themes, and to me, that's the heart of a castaway tale. There's the issue of how you would physically survive on an island, which is fascinating, and it's fascinating people forever. How did Robinson Crusoe survive? That book was a big bestseller in its day. But there's also the issue of how you would survive spiritually, how you would survive in isolation. And one of the differences between my character, Marguerite, and Robinson Crusoe, he starts out alone on the island. And most shipwreck stories, that they're like the only survivor of the ship that goes down. But Marguerite starts with two companions whom she loves, and then she has to go through their loss. And that's a big part of her ordeal. And she has to make a decision, not just how she's going to survive, but if she wants to keep going, why she might want to survive. And to me, that's sort of the heart of the book, that it's a spiritual test as well as a physical test. Marguerite, in particular, as a pampered aristocratic lady surrounded by servants, has never been alone in her life or done anything for herself. So it's the theme of isolation, but also self-sufficiency. Self-sufficiency in a physical way and also in a spiritual way. Do you have enough inside of you to, enough strength inside of you to carry on? Can you still take joy in the world when there's no one to share it with?
Right.
No other human to share it with. How does all of that work? And so as a writer, I was fascinated by those questions, and I really enjoyed exploring them in this book. I chose the title Isola partly because of this, because the word, which means island in Italian, is just a simple regular word, but to me, it looked like the beginning of isolation. And it also, if you break it down, it looks like Isola, like I solo, or in the feminine form, I alone. And I felt that, and Marguerite talks about this in the book, that she feels at some point that she becomes an island herself. What is it like to feel that you are an island? Not connected to the main, So all of that was very interesting to me.
And she never wants to lose that. Even when she returns to civilization, she wants to always remember what she learned on that island.
Yes. Yeah. So this experience breaks her and it also remakes her. And these are hard lessons, but also precious lessons for her. Yes.
Yeah. And I also was fascinated to hear that you wrote this book in isolation. You didn't tell anybody that you were working on this book. Two things. Can you tell us how that came to be? And also, did writing this in isolation help you channel Marguerite in a way?
Yes, I did write this book in isolation. So I was writing a different book called Sam, which is a coming of age story about an American girl in the 21st century. And I had a contract for that book, and that was sort of my public facing project. And I knew that, people were waiting to see that one. But Sam is about as different from Marguerite in terms of time and place and idiom as you can imagine. The voice of that book, it's a very American book, let's just say, and very contemporary. However, Sam is a boulderer. And in that book, she is always trying to claw her way to the top of these granite boulders that we have here in New England. It's set in New England. And it was really while writing Sam and writing about her sort of physical challenges. And, she has many challenges in her life, but she's a striver and a survivor. And she has that in common with Marguerite. And I think that writing Sam, in part, inspired me to write this book about a woman also coming of age, but in a very different century. However, my editor loved Sam, and it was the first book that I worked on with her. And this book was so different that I was nervous about telling her about it. And I was nervous about telling my agent about it. It was a departure for me. I had never written a historical novel set so long ago. It was a different voice that I was adopting. It was a different kind of research. And because I was uncertain about it, and frankly, because I wasn't sure I could pull off the story, I decided not to tell anyone about it and just keep it private. It was easier for me to write it without talking about it. And in general, I don't really like to talk about works in progress, but this was an extreme case. So I ended up writing Sam in the mornings and then sort of time traveling and writing this historical novel in the afternoons. And when I say I didn't tell anyone, I'm not just talking about my agent and my editor. I didn't tell my own family. My children didn't know about this book. I never told my husband. I literally never told a soul until I finished the first draft after about 18 months of work. Wow. I did confess at that point that I was writing it to my agent.
And you told your family.
Yeah.
Or you waited a bit more. Yeah, that's amazing.
But, and here's where I felt something in common with her. I began to take some pleasure in the solitude of it.
Exactly. Yes. And so this was your first work of historical fiction. Did you enjoy it?
Very much. Very much. I mean, I had told myself, oh, it's going to be so much research and how will I possibly manage and that kind of thing. But, the truth is I love research. I could just read books for days and weeks and years, which I did to write this book. And I love reading, this kind of thing. Yeah. So actually, once I got into it, It was a pure joy.
And so does that mean in the future, not necessarily, tomorrow, you might do another novel of
Yeah,
historical
I think
fiction? Yeah.
so. I think so.
Oh,
Yes.
good. Good. It was good. Good. You challenged yourself. It all ended so well. Can we talk about the concept of freedom and how it applied to Marguerite, a woman at the time?
Well, women didn't have the kind of freedom that we do now, of course, or the kind of privileges and legal rights that we have, frankly. When she talks in these opening pages that I read about how she had no sisters or brothers or uncles, these would have been the people who would have protected her. As an unattached woman, you really were very vulnerable at that time. You needed to be attached to a powerful father or have a brother to defend you or have a husband who, will take care of you. Legally you were chattel, I really feel. And so she suffers from that. She, in some ways, feels free on her island when she is cast away. But at great cost. She's in danger and she's also free, At
Right.
home, she was not really free. And she also, but she thought that she had the illusion of safety, but she knows that she was not safe there either. So she reflects on this situation when she's on the island and when she gets off the island.
And yeah, when she gets off the island, you realize it's just as, well, it's very perilous.
Yes.
Because no one's going to accept her. They think that who is this lone beggar woman?
Right. If you don't have the proper clothes and connections in her society, then you are not safe. And actually, here's an interesting question. Is that not true for us as well?
Oh, nowadays.
Lose your phone, don't have your credit card, and are dressed in rags. I mean, it's
God,
tricky,
I don't even
right?
want to think about that. So your writing style, I mean, it was interesting what you said about Shakespeare, because that you didn't have to deal with that because this was in France. But your writing style definitely feels of the times. It's very kind of restrained and a bit old-fashioned and believable. And I was wondering, was it like learning a new language? Were there certain books that really helped you figure out that?
I really thought a lot about how she would sound and sort of the voice of this book, as I mentioned. And I settled on something that was ever so slightly archaic, but still very accessible to us, like clean and understandable. I wasn't interested in using a lot of jargon or old-fashioned idioms or anything like that. There's no point in that. So it's very subtle, that it's subtly old.
Right.
And if you compare it to my book, Sam, which I wrote at the same time, that's a very contemporary book where, she speaks like an American person.
Yeah.
An American kid. And thinks that way too. But the idiom here is ever so slightly different. So I would describe it, it's not radical. It's just you can do a lot with a little, with voice.
Yeah.
So, for example, while Sam might say, I threw it on the ground, she would say onto the ground, like just a very, very little changes make a big difference. And once I got into her, it was sort of like performing or acting a part. I knew her well enough that I knew what she would say in different situations.
Yeah. What's the best piece of writing advice you've ever been given?
The best piece of writing advice I've ever been given is probably from my dad, who said when I was pretty young, like really young, teenager, don't let people pigeonhole you. Do what interests you. Don't feel that you have to do the same thing all the time, essentially, he was saying. And that was important advice for me because I am interested in these departures and trying different things. And, having written a historical novel, I am not going to write historical novels only. And having written a very contemporary novel, I'm not going to limit myself in that way. I will follow the characters and themes and subjects that interest me. And I will also feel free to take different voices in different books. I'm not really interested in having like that kind of consistent style that everybody can always tell that it's a book by me. I'd rather be more of a chameleon. So
I love it.
I found that advice or those words very liberating.
Yeah. You also write in different genres, short stories.
Yes, I also write short fiction.
And poetry or not anymore?
When I was a child, I wrote poetry, but I don't write poetry anymore. But I read a lot of poetry and I read in many genres. That's a piece of advice that I would give writers. Feel free to read in many genres. I've learned so much from reading plays and thinking about plays and going to them, about structure and plotting. I've learned so much from poetry, the love of language, the attention to voice and nuance in a poem.
Right.
Don't only read in your own genre. I read a lot of biography and nonfiction, of course, and history.
Yeah.
You can learn from all of that.
Fantastic. Well, I notice in your Instagram, every Friday you tell us what book you're reading. And I have a question. Do you read a book a week? Because it seems like you might.
I usually have multiple books going. So if it's sort of like, this is a book I'm going to start. And so it's not necessarily that I'm going to finish it that weekend, but it's a book I'm going to start. And then sometimes I don't finish it, or I'll be reading other things, or I'll finish it later in the week, or maybe even weeks later if it's a long book.
Okay. So, the other thing that you do on your Instagram, which I think is fantastic, is you do those minute kind of narratives where you answer people's questions about writing. And it's just very informative. It's not, you make it very approachable. So are people writing into you with these questions, or are you thinking of them on your own?
Yeah. So they're questions that I've collected from giving talks at different places. I go to a lot of like colleges and schools. And so people will ask questions, or community places, libraries, and they'll ask questions. And sometimes I won't have a chance to answer everything. And sometimes I won't be happy with the answer that I gave. So I'll try to do a better answer in the video. And then I also teach on occasion.
I just think what I love about your Instagram is it's like these short, you just make it so approachable. What would you say? I mean, like, I love it when people say that to write a novel, you say, you break it down. First, write a paragraph. Don't be too ambitious to start off with. Start small. You have these just wise, honest lessons. Like you say, you're not a fast writer. You're a slow writer.
Right.
You make yourself very human, even though.
Well, I am human. I make a lot of mistakes. Yes.
Even though you wrote 3 books at the same time, it wasn't just Sam. You also had a book of short stories you're working on.
Yeah.
I think you might be a superhuman.
No, just an empty nester.
Oh yeah, that's right. Exactly. That's right. One thing I also read is that you're an early morning swimmer.
Yes.
And I was wondering, does that help your brain for writing a bit, clearing your head?
I think of a lot of really good ideas in the water, and I recommend it. I know not everyone's a morning person, and some people think of great ideas in the middle of the night or late at night. But I am one of those people that morning time is my best time. And I get in the water and I start swimming, and I'm just sort of, oh, wait, I should have done it the other way. I have to go back, or I forgot to say this thing. And it all just sort of, I don't know whether it's like stuff from the night that I was dreaming about or unconscious sort of bubbles over, but I come up with a lot of stuff while I'm swimming. And then I feel kind of awake after that. And that's when I do my best work.
I know exactly what you mean about swimming. More than walking almost, although I love walking, but swimming, you get lost in the laps.
Yes.
And something dreamlike happens to you when you're swimming.
It's very weird. Your goggles kind of fog up. You can't really see very well. People can't bother you. If you're walking, your phone could still ring, or you'd
exactly.
see or you're see a neighbor, or you dodge a car or something, and something about being in the pool. It's a combination of like that rhythm and that sensory deprivation. And your body's feeling good. You're moving gently through the water. It's fantastic.
Yeah. No, I can relate totally. Even though I'm not much of a swimmer, but I know when I have.
I'm not a good swimmer at all, I should add. I'm really not strong or fast, but I love it.
That's all that matters. So one thing I forgot to ask you about the book, what would you like readers to take away from the book?
I think that I would like readers to feel that they've been on a journey in this book, that they have traveled with Marguerite to a place that is really like going to the moon for her, and that they experience what she experiences as she does and go on that journey with her. If they could feel that with her, that's what I would wish.
Yeah. I think you did. I felt
her ordeal,
very much.
her resilience, and her triumph, and and the thinking that she goes through, that the growth that she undergoes.
How did you know how to describe that island so well? Did you look at a lot of Google Maps, or that island is so vivid?
Oh, thank you. Well, I looked at maps. I looked at videos of islands in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, many of which are restricted for conservation purposes, so people can't go on them. And I thought a lot about the birds on the island, and I looked at a film of birds diving and fishing. And of course, she doesn't know what all these species are. She's never seen this before. And I loved writing about all of this through her eyes, her new eyes, her fresh eyes, that it's all so miraculous, so strange to her to see a fox that is completely white from head to tail, to see a pure white bear that's so fierce and terrifying. All of this is new to her. And I wanted the reader to experience that. I think some of the vividness comes from the fact that it's all new to her.
Right.
To convey that newness.
Oh my God. No, it was very good. I read in another interview, maybe with the Harvard magazine, you said that your works aren't autobiographical, but they're deeply personal.
Mm-hmm.
And then I read that you grew up in Honolulu and you didn't wear shoes to school until maybe 5th grade.
Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking Marguerite's barefoot a lot.
Yeah.
Did you draw on a lot of, I don't know.
Yeah. So she comes to that, well, I did. I grew up on an island, and I've always been really fascinated with islands. And although my island was tropical, it's a very, not that it's easy necessarily to live on a tropical island without help if you are marooned, but
yeah,
you're not going to freeze. Like she really could have frozen. So that was a huge, huge issue for her. So it's quite a different climate from my island climate.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Wow. No, thank God for those bear skins. Can you tell us something surprising about yourself?
Surprising about myself. Well, we've mentioned that I come from Hawaii, and people are often surprised by that because I don't necessarily I'm very fair, and I don't look like I necessarily came from Hawaii. And we've mentioned that I'm a morning person, but lots of people are. I don't think that's that surprising. I think people really are surprised by how slowly I work, to hear that I work slowly. They think I work fast. And I think that it's deceptive sometimes when you look at the publication date. It doesn't always reflect all the work that went into something and how slow and gradual it really was. So that part surprises people. And people don't always believe me when I say it.
Well,
but I only write about a page a day.
Yeah. Which doesn't seem like a lot, but the page is probably pretty good. You've really put a lot of
thought. I try to make it as good as I can. But you know what? I write a page a day, and sometimes I have to get rid of that page even. They're not always good.
I read that your grandmother told you to slow down.
Yes. Mm-hmm. My grandmother was a poet. And she said to me when I was young, you need to slow down. Don't push so hard. And that was actually also great writing advice for me. And I think for many people. In fact, my whole career, I think I've been learning to slow down, to develop my ideas more, not to throw away the drama, but to develop it. And over time, I'm getting there.
Yeah. Fantastic. No, I really... This was a unique book, and I so felt like I was on that island.
Oh.
And then also in France, both before and after. You depict both courtly France and the underside, where all the servants are and they're rejecting her. And then the one question I had, is it true, or is it more in this just the story that she met Queen Marguerite?
I put that in myself. There's no documentation of a meeting like that. And now the Queen Marguerite did write her story, and it's included in her Heptameron, which is published after the Queen died. And you can get that in English in a Penguin Classics paperback.
Right.
And it's like story number 69 in this collection of stories. And the Queen said that all these stories were based on true stories. And I had the idea that the Queen would have talked to Roberval about who was the courtier, and so that meeting with the Queen and that concept of his trying to undermine her and, spoiler alert, steal her story was my own device. And it was my way of talking about the different versions of the story.
Right. That was probably fantastic when you saw the totally different version.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So interesting.
Yeah. And he was just such an evil man, and he was always in the background. He was always there.
I think he was very scary. But to me, the scariest thing about him was that he didn't do anything illegal. That he felt and was justified in all the things that he did. By right, by his position as an aristocratic white man.
She was.
Yeah, he was a scary guy.
He was scary, and she was powerless, but she was very smart.
Yes, she was smart.
She was very smart. Can you tell us what you're working on now, or do you want to keep it a secret?
Well, I'll tell you about my new book, which is coming out in 2026, which is it's a story cycle, really. It's like a novel about this multi-generational family, and it's a contemporary book in contemporary America, and it's called This Is Not About Us. And I actually sent I emailed a draft of it to my daughter when I finished writing it. And she said, I think it's so cute that you labeled the document, This Is Not About Us, to reassure the family. And I said, no, that's the title of the book. And she said, oh, wait, it is about us. And I was like, no, it's just fiction. It's not about us. It's just a family. And she was like, sure. Anyway, so it's very different style from this book. And I've been working on it for a number of years. Pieces of that book have appeared in the New Yorker over the last few years.
Right.
So I'm excited about that. I just finished doing the page proofs of that book. And I am working on new projects as well, but they're in earlier stages. So okay. I will, we'll have to meet again.
Yes, we will.
In a couple of years.
One thing I also read that your daughter said is she only reads books that you dedicate to her.
That's right. Yeah, she's a character. She's 23. She's the baby. She was the newborn. She grew up. And she works in London now. And somebody said, oh, are you going to read your mother's new book? And she said, is it dedicated to me? And I was like, no, I can't dedicate every book to you. And she said, well, then I won't read that one.
Too funny. It's really funny. Well, Allegra, thank you so much. This was really fascinating.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. And thank you for your wonderful questions.
Oh, my pleasure. I knew it would be good because I was watching all your Instagrams and your interviews. You're very warm and approachable.
Oh, thanks.
Thank you for listening to this episode. Allegra said she wanted readers to feel like they've been on a trip. Trust me, when you read Isola, you will feel like you've been on a trip. I could feel the snow and the ice and the bear trying to break into her cave, but his shoulders were just too wide. And then you'll feel like you're in the gorgeous, fragrant French countryside or the luxurious tapestried castles of Renaissance France. All this without leaving your armchair. Not bad. I would say that this is a novel to read during the day, less so at night, as you might find polar bears and wicked, cruel guardians entering your dreams. I love this book, and I love the Audible version just as much. Allegra is such a gifted writer. If you'd like to purchase the book and support the podcast at the same time, you can do so through the link in the show notes. Thank you, and see you in 2 weeks.